better. Yeah, I'm still out of town. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan right now. So I decided I was supposed to go live before I left Chicago, but I wasn't able to. And I'm actually here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My wife and I are here for a graduate students in psychology conference because I'm just like 3 blocks from the University of Michigan, and I just couldn't hang at the conference. I have to confess to y'all, I am not a scholar, I am not an academic, and I am not a researcher because if I can't hang, you know how I just can't hang in those spaces. You know, I cannot sterilely and distant from a distant position discuss Black psychology, the Black condition, racism, and history. I am fully vested. I am absolutely biased. And I enter all of these realms with a very specific agenda. So I am a revolutionist. I am a malcontent. I am a conspirator. I am not so I don't really qualify as an academic or scholar. So this is the Bro Q&A with Bro Diallo, but I'm just going to give that disclaimer. If you're coming for unbiased scholarship, you're in the wrong place. I come with a very specific agenda, and achieving my agenda takes priority over the purity of anything, the purity of my ideas, or I have no intent or attempt to be unbiased. I am very biased against oppression, capitalism, white domination. So that's being said. Oh, I'm sorry, Marlena. Go do your planting and check back in later. Also, for y'all watching on YouTube, at least one of my videos have been flagged by the new YouTube hate speech algorithm. Someone told me that they attempted to share one of my videos, and YouTube informed them that I was a hate speech, a source of hate speech. So I don't know what that means, how they intend to just prevent my videos from being shared or searched, or they intend to delete my entire YouTube page for hate speech. I don't know. And I'll let y'all know as I know what YouTube intends to do. But beyond Bro Diallo, I've told y'all for a long time, don't rely on YouTube or any of these mediums to be archives for our sources. I've been telling y'all, get hard copies, DVDs, CDs, cassette tapes, your own independent servers to archive our scholarship, our ideology. We need every Black home needs to become a library, a multimedia library. Every Black home needs to be an archive. Every Black person in the world needs to be an amateur archivist so that we don't continue to lose. But anyway, enough of that. If this is a Q&A session, I'm not at home, so I don't have access to my little books and articles, so it might be a little bit more difficult. But like I said, if I don't know the answer, if I can't guide you towards an answer, we'll work it out together, or I'll have to conclude that I don't know and get back with you later after I have an opportunity for research. So if you guys have any Q&A, and I might be cut short because the internet access in the hotel room is kind of iffy. I'm in the Residence Inn in Ann Arbor, and internet has been spotty all weekend. So if you guys have any questions on YouTube, I'll jump back and forth between Facebook Live and YouTube. So let me know. What are my thoughts on Trump pardoning war criminals? Carl asked. I said something that kind of alluded to this. I'm kind of disappointed in myself. I'm not as outraged as I should be about Trump pardoning war criminals, specific war criminals, because the entire U.S. military is engaged in war crimes. So I really don't know what you would have to do to qualify as a war criminal, because the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the U.S. ongoing bombing of northern Pakistan, because a lot of the so-called rebels or terrorist fighters ran into northern Pakistan to seek refuge from U.S. bombings along with civilians, the U.S. AFRICOM. All of these violate not only my principles or principles of basic human decency, they are against the laws that white people set for themselves to follow under the UN. non-aggression pacts and things of that nature. So everyone who is enlisted in the U.S. military is officially a war criminal, because if you're given uh, uh, commands or orders that violate the Universal Code of Justice, human rights, the UN Charter, you are officially a war criminal. So they hung Nazis for doing things under the Nazi regime that U.S. soldiers are engaged in, war against peace. So to me, it's kind of redundant to say, oh, well, these are war criminals in a criminal army. This imperialism officially is illegal. Imperialism is illegal. Wars of aggression are high crimes and illegal, and the United States is engaged in imperialism and war crimes. So from my point of view and my analysis, every U.S. soldier is a war criminal, unless they are, of course, like Chelsea Manning and other heroic U.S. soldiers who refuse to engage in imperialism. Many war resistors, the War Resistors League. So any compliant U.S. soldier is a war criminal. So the entire U.S. military. So you're a war criminal within a war criminal operation. So it's a bit redundant, number one. Number two, many of these psychotic war criminals are going to be released into white communities and live amongst white people. And 99% of the atrocities that U.S. soldiers that return home psychotic, they commit against their family, loved ones, and within their own community. So this is more of a danger that Trump is exposing generally white people to. None of those, psychotic white soldiers are going to move to the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago. They're not about to move to South Kansas City. They're not going to move to any of the few remaining Black communities in Brooklyn. So Trump is kind of screwing his own people, releasing these murderous psychopaths back into their communities. And I have no doubt that eventually, if he is successful, because he hasn't gone through with it, he's proposed it, that if he does do this, we're going to see these guys pop back up in the headlines. So that's but I am outraged, but I'm not outraged at what Trump is doing. I'm outraged at the U.S. military in general. I'm outraged at the Pentagon. I'm outraged at Bush. I'm outraged at Obama. I'm outraged at the U.S. military. The U.S. military has not been compliant with the Universal Code of Human Justice, human rights. The U.S. Military has been a criminal organization since its founding, but especially since the UN Charter was ratified, since the 1940s. So, if you're just now figuring out there are war criminals in the U.S. military, I don't know what to tell you. So, okay, Tito asked, at the Black graduate student in psychology, did they discuss the works of Dr. Amos Wilson, Marimba Ani, Bobby Wright? No, none of the revolutionary or Pan-African or radical psychologists' names came up the whole time I was there. But I've been in and out of the conference, and I've been talking to some conference attendees, but no. Generally, what I've heard is mainly what is focused on is helping grad students in psychology elevate within the career and get to their degree. So teaching them how to write grants, teaching them about tenure and promotion within the academia. But when they did talk about actual Black psychology, they mostly talk about Black people understanding the impacts of racism on Black psychology and helping Black people to cope, not to overcome, not to combat, not to subvert, not to challenge, but to cope with being exposed to aggression, micro and macro white aggression. But no, there was no hint of radicalism, of rebellion, or even resentment at the state of affairs that I found in my limited time there. So maybe, I know my wife said there was one brother there, one Black psychologist who was a radical. But there was one, let me say, Dr. Wade B. Nobles, and Dr. Wade B. Nobles' research and analysis was articulated in some isolated circles at the conference. But I would not, on a revolutionary, I would not call this, this was definitely a status quo type conference. It's really an integrationist, striver, Black excellence, Black girl magic type environment. And I say Black girl magic because I say 80% of the attendees were Black women, and all the presenters that I saw while I was there were Black women. So y'all go girls, go on away from me. So but I don't want to talk bad on the conference because number one, I'm still here in Ann Arbor, and when I go out to get some dinner, or I go out with my kids or something, I might run into some attendees, and if they come across my channels, I just want to avoid the awkwardness. So maybe I'll talk about on the Monday Bro Diallo show. I'll give a more in depth because I did take notes at the conference. But while I'm here, I'm just want to be cool and get out of here, Ann Arbor. You know, I'll tell y'all about the Ethiopian food here and the atmosphere, and I'll talk the University of Michigan. We can talk about that when I'm back safely on the south side, the deadly south side of Chicago. Uh, Nikki asked, "What's your opinion of Congressman John Lewis, who Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, replaced him in the SNCC chairman?" I have an extremely, I think when John Lewis tried to march across that bridge, I think they did some permanent damage to that man's mental capacity. That nigga crazy. John Lewis is out of his goddamn mind. John Lewis, and here's the thing about many of these civil rights, not just John Lewis, let's not pick on that punk, but the Congressional Black Caucus, what's his name? The late Thurgood Marshall. Many of these civil rights activists and integrationists, they rode into positions of authority and prominence, and not just in the public sector, like being congressmen, CEOs, mayors. If you notice from the late 60s up to the 70s, there was another reconstruction. There was another Black reconstruction where the power structure, the white power structure had decided in order to avoid Black revolution that they would make concessions and they would bargain with the civil rights. Black people have been fighting for civil rights since the 1800s. So we have been having ongoing uprisings of civil rights and we shall overcome for many centuries. But what really was the catalyst of that is that for the first time, the Black struggle for justice in the United States came about at the exact same time as a decolonial struggle in Africa, a non-alignment struggle in Africa 2.0, which is Latin America. There's more Black people in Latin America than in the United States, in Caribbean. So you had Caribbean non-alignment struggles and socialist movements. So for the first time, what happened in the 60s is not we just marched and got freedom, because that's what we don't understand. All of our progress, whether it was emancipation or civil rights reforms, have been international movements. That's what's so disgusting about ADOS, pretending that Black people can or should ever achieve anything on an isolated level tied into the borders or the boundaries of the United States. But anyway, so John Lewis and these stupid Negroes did not understand that they only got their civil rights reforms as a convergence of decolonization, Latin America non-alignment, and Western or European communist and socialist struggles. So what they said was the leftist movement was converging and expanding, threatening the right, imperialism and capitalism. So they said, we're going to have to carve off some of the leftists and bring them under the umbrella of imperialist and capitalism. So they went to many Blacks and said, we're going to integrate you into the systems of capitalism and imperialism and give you certain roles, titles, privileges, and opportunities. But as a result of that, you're going to have to subvert the militant movement. So as they assassinated the radicals, they made concessions to the liberals and to the integrationists. John Lewis came in under that fold. And so John Lewis is a fervent believer in integration. He believes that Black people can take positions within white establishment and white institutions and have positive impact on Black people as a whole. And so John Lewis is irrational. John Lewis is, oh, hold on. Yes. Oh, hold on. Hey, is it over? You're back early.
It's not over, but I'm
on live. I'm on live. Watch your mouth.
Lordy.
That's why I said we're not going to talk about people while we're still here now. You didn't close the door. Anyway, so I think that John Lewis and people like him are either consciously treasonous or treasonous by fault. But they hold to integration, even though integration has been our agenda for 100 years, artificially elevated as our agenda. And I think that we have to put those old sick horses out to pasture. I think that I think he's really a liability to our race. Individuals like him, Bobby Rush, Many of these Negroes are liabilities. I think that they still promote integrationism, even though integrationism has proven to be harmful. Romo and Seiko are downstairs at the swimming pool. Okay. So they're down there. I told them I'd go and bring them up after you got back. I wasn't expecting you back so early. Right. You'd be done at noon. It's noon, right? Oh, wait, it's 1. I'm sorry. Ann Arbor's in a different time zone as Chicago, and I haven't changed my watch over to Ann Arbor time, and I don't intend to. But anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. Fire for them, later for them. Really, the John Lewis's are assets and instruments of our oppressors. They don't fight for us. They don't represent us. Their job is to corral and to demobilize us. So that's really it. 43 C Marsh asks, has there ever been a concerted effort to train revolutionaries in African statecraft? Yes, there has been many efforts to train us in statecraft, and one of the chief ways to train people in statecraft is by simply constructing institutions. There was a time where all of our Black organizations were training grounds. Now we have this new idea where you go off to school, you learn skills and things like that, and then you go off into the world to work. But coming off the plantation, they understood that through education, you have to make the road by walking, or we had organizations like Break and Build. So one of the earliest organizations that trained us, that deliberately tried to create who engaged in statecraft at the same time they tried to educate us, was the Tuskegee Institute under Booker T. Washington. And Marcus Garvey's industrial elements, the industrial component of Marcus Garvey Back to Africa movement and the Universal Negro Improvement, that was a statecraft organization. If you read the academics, we know a lot about the rhetoric and militancy of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, but if you read, they had institution building and statecraft elements embedded in their program. So most of the organizations that we knew of, even SCLC and SNCC, if you look at their hierarchical structure and their code, their protocols, embedded in most of our organizations. Now modern organizations like Black Lives Matter or Hands Up, Don't Shoot, and the NAACP, those type of organizations, they pretty much say the state is the state. So they don't try to construct a state, they try to reform the state. So most Black organizations that stand in principled opposition to capitalism and Western institutions, they have just by default statecraft embedded. But the other integrationist organizations, or integrations, because the NAACP, you go from chapter to chapter. You have some NAACP chapters that were ran by people like Medgar Evers or Robert F. Williams. Those had totally different characteristics than the national. But integrationist organizations pretty much saw as their mission is we don't need to construct the state because we are Americans. So what we need to do is reform the existing state, which is the white state. So you don't have to do statecraft, you have to do state reform, policy reform, and integration, and elect Black people and more Black CEOs and more Black billionaires. But those who say this is illegitimate, they're not unfit to rule, and their structures and policies and constitutions and infrastructure of their state is never will be ours, and we don't want to participate and we don't want to implement it, then it's naturally statecraft. So many of the organizations that you look into, I know a lot of times we see with Garvey and other movements and the Black Panthers, we see them marching up and down the street with shotguns or banners, but we don't look at the ideological foundations, and a lot of times we ignore the foundational mission or the mission statement. So yeah, most Black organizations coming since Emancipation Proclamation had an element, if not an ongoing statecraft. But the statecraft did not look like Western statecraft, but it was pretty much institution building. Because when you're coming from a position where you were classified as an animal, where you were classified as a beast of burden, and you have to assert your humanity. So asserting for African people, asserting our humanity and reaffirming our humanity was statecraft. That was an element of statecraft. So depends on how you define it. Yes, I'm familiar with Hubert Henry Harrison, very familiar with one of the earliest Pan-Africanists. I don't think he's recognized enough. And I've written about him on my blog and recognized like his birthday and passing. Number 4411825 asks, what are the limitations, pitfalls of movements that seem progressive but are reactionary, such as colorism in the present form? I wouldn't define colorism as a movement. I would define colorism as a symptom of being under white oppression. We can't solve colorism, and I think we spend a lot of time on fighting the symptoms. You know, if you develop cancer, there's two things related to cancer. Number one, the source of the malignancy. Now, the source of malignancy can be anything from a genetic default, a congenital genetic default, to exposure to environmental contaminants. But there are a lot of symptoms. Those are the two core things: the malignancy, the malignancy of the tumor, and whatever caused or provoked the malignancy. But cancer can give you everything from muscle wasting to intense pain to even psychological issues, especially if you have a brain tumor, depression. You know, a lot of people with or delusion, people with cancer start to say, well, the Lord will make a way somehow. And they fall into delusions and fall into these pseudosciences. And colorism is a symptom. It's not the tumor. It's not the nuclear waste dump. It's a symptom. And I think we all are very familiar what happens when you focus on symptoms and ignore the root causes. So I'm not sure. The question is worded kind of funny, but what are the limitations and pitfalls of movement that seem progressive but are reactionary? So I'll answer the first half of that. The pitfalls of movements that are progressive that seem reactionary, the worst thing about those movements is that they waste the time of sincere people. Black revolutionaries are our most precious commodity. We talk a lot about, oh, but Africa has gold, Africa has coltan, Africa has copper, Black America has all this wonderful, we have everything from athletes to the greatest entertainers of the world come out of Black America. But the only thing of value that Black people possess anywhere in the world are Black revolutionaries. And the reason for that is, no matter what else we have, whether it's gold in our soil or talent in our feet, and we can dance and do all that stuff, all of that has gone to the profit of other people. And the only thing that has prevented that from going to the profit or slowed that down or reversed that are revolutionary actions. So the only truly valuable resource African people have are revolutionaries and the revolutionary ideologies and concepts that we adhere to and carry out. And so any of these so-called progressive movements will take people who are truly sincere in securing liberation for us and waste their fucking time. And the worst thing you can do to Black people is waste the time of our revolutionaries, or demobilize them, discourage them, or distract them. So that's the number one thing. You get a lot of sincere people caught up in bullshit movements. You got a lot of sincere people walking around Black Lives Matter, or you got a lot of sincere people that were caught up in SNCC or or NAACP. So that's the worst thing about it. And colorism, I know it's really an enticing topic for us to sit around, but it's equivalent to, you know, Jews sitting around in a gas chamber debating about whether Orthodox or secular Judaism is appropriate, or who's more Jew, you know, or the Ashkenazi Jews, or Eastern European Jews, Central European Jews, or Westernized Jews. Which Jew is the real Jew? When all of them are in this gas chamber together, who gives a shit? So, are you going back to the conference?
I am.
Okay. So that's my take on that. The Chinese engaged in mass execution of landlords in their Cultural Revolution. Why did they see the landlords as exploitative? Mao understood that China wasn't just Mao. Here's the thing: when you have a revolution, a lot of times when people come under occupation and they're overthrown, and then they overthrow their colonizers. What they tend to do is go back to the condition that predated the colonizers. Go ahead. They go back to the conditions that predated the colonizers. And some revolutionaries, true revolutionaries, understand that the shit that your people were doing prior to coming under colonization is what made you vulnerable to colonization. And that's why I don't bow. When somebody comes to me, I just had a debate with, and he wants me to say his name. He said he thought I was attacking him or shading him without calling his name. But Fode and I, with the Black Star, and I still consider Fode Mansoure an ally. But Fode said that he comes to me and says, this is an African tradition. Homosexuality is an African. And that's what we were debating, because they barred homosexuals from their organization, whatever. But he says, this is an African. And I say, I don't give a shit. Was it African? Whether something was traditionally African. And if y'all follow my writings, I always say, if your only justification for doing something is that it's tradition or it comes from the past, then it's worthless. And that's your only justification, because whatever Africans were doing prior to European and Arab colonization made us vulnerable. So whatever we were doing in the past, you can't just examine the oppressor. You can't just say, well, the oppressor is here, let's focus on the oppressor. You have to say, what made us vulnerable to the oppression? What allowed for the penetration? What were we doing before the first colonizers set foot on our soil to make us vulnerable? So you have to examine what's going on, but you have to have what went on in order to understand how to stop it or reverse it and prevent it in the future. So Mao was very astute. Mao was not saying, I'm not going to kick out. Can you close that door, Erica? I'm not going to kick out the European colonizers just to bring back the Chinese oligarchs. Because if you study pre-colonial China, which has over 5,000 years of consistent history, China was a feudal society that had a ruling oligarchs, a dominating ruling oligarchs, who ruled over a massive numbers of peasants. And the peasants had no more rights than under Chinese oligarchs than they had under European, British, or Japanese colonization. So he said, I don't want to go back to that old style. So he said, and he also understood, just like in Africa, just like in the New World, the first people to capitulate to the colonizers were the rulers. A lot of times the common people said, let's fight these people. And the rulers were like, listen, they promised I could keep my mansion. They had promised that I could take all the gold that I accumulated from my people and invest it into the British East India Company so I could stay fat. So the criminal elements, a lot of the criminals and the elites are often the people who first, the gangsters and the talented 10th are the first people that bow down to outside colonization. So Mao didn't just in his Cultural Revolution want to purge the outsiders. He wanted to purge the sickness within their people. And it wasn't just about kicking out the Europeans, kicking out the Japanese. It was also about purging what was in China that made China vulnerable to outside infiltration. So he did not want a return of the feudal system. Just like in Africa, you see what happened. Africa wasn't allowed to have its cultural revolution. So a lot of times in African decolonization, a lot of people that came to power just re-implemented feudalism, neo-colonialism, and a lot of the freedom fighters like Mugabe is a perfect example of this, who had a retro because they didn't have, you fought a bloody battle to liberate Rhodesia and transform it into Zimbabwe. But still, you're a Roman Catholic who amassed billions of dollars and it was just income. So that was the reason why he's like, I'm going to kill the Chinese landlords. I'm going to kill the colonizers and kill the cooperators, kill the collaborators, and kill the Negro elites. The Chinese elites. So that's the reason. We have the danger of regressing. And what is the point of liberating our people if we're going to go back? Just imagine, I asked this before, imagine if Dr. Umar went from being the prince to being the king of Pan-Africanism. Imagine if we successfully overthrow Western domination and individuals like Tariq Nasheed, Dr. Umar, and other individuals of this ilk came to power. Immediately, we already know there would be repression of women. Women will be relegated to the role of servitude. They would ban abortion. It just be living under a Christian theocracy. Of course, the gays, y'all in trouble. It wouldn't be much different for y'all under Umar regime than it would be under a Christian fascist regime. There will be rigid societal hierarchy and rigid societal norms. We have no doubt that they would enrich themselves at the expense of the rest of us. That capitalism would still fit well to that post-European world. The accumulation of wealth, the hierarchical control of people. He said he wants to create an all-boys school, all-girls school, richest Western, Austrian-style education structure. So if through implementing revolution, and I talked to some of the people I worked with when I first moved to Chicago and started organizing in Chicago, I said, how do you fight how do you advocate for external revolution, but you don't engage in internal revolution? How can reactionary organization carry out revolutionary transformation of a society? So we're real comfortable with asking for our oppressor to change, but we're not so as comfortable as creating change within ourselves, just like Leadership for Life. Look at all these Black organizations that got Leader for Life in all these African post-colonial that haven't even developed a method for the peaceful and non-disruptive exchange of power and leadership. Reactionary. So that's why in the Cultural Revolution, he's like, I'm not just going to kill the European invaders or the Japanese invader. I'm going to freaking kill the Chinese collaborators. And anybody that wants to take China, that wants to hold China in place, any Chinese that want to support or embrace the status quo, they got to go. Any Chinese that want to take us back to some mythical grand past, some mythical historical moment. So be very careful of those Black people that only talk about how great we were and never have any concept of how great we can be or will be. And their only notion is to return us to traditional African garb and traditional African language. They want to lock us into some regressive past. That's not revolutionary. So yeah, we could go to Africa or we can go to our communities. They still want us to eat soul food and want us to jump the broom, hell, and pick cotton. I don't know, that time will never return, and we shouldn't fight for that time to return. And any past tradition that doesn't advance us forward, it's not a tradition we're obligated to respect. So Mao, if you read him, he was anti-Chinese tradition. He even banned certain martial arts and banned anything that, if you come to a Maoist and say, well, we did this in the past, that's not a justification to continue to do it in the future. So that's the reason. True revolution, complete revolution. Have you heard of China's social credit system? Yes, I have. Do you think the system such as above can be useful to implement New Negro? Yes. Okay, the question is world travel. Have you heard of China's social credit system? Do you think a system such as above can be useful to the implementation of the New Negro Self-Exposure Protocol? I really think the New Negro Self-Exposure Protocol should be intensified. For you who don't know, the New Negro Self-Exposure Protocol, or the NNSEP, is basically a system to reduce the level of pettiness, bickering, and unnecessary dispute within the Black cultural community, which means when you implement the New Negro Self-Exposure Protocol, you no longer are in a position where rumors, innuendos, and accusations are valid. So you come to someone and say, I don't like this guy. And if you are in the Black cultural community, there's a lot of negative opinions, a lot of hostile, a lot of conflicts amongst Black folks that could be avoided if we simply allow people to expose themselves. So the self-exposure protocol means that if you have any issues with another person, you are only allowed to use their articulated positions against them. So if I come online and I say, let's say, black people are our own worst enemy. I think black people are our own worst enemy. And if you truly believe that and you articulate that, then that's you exposing yourself as a threat to black people. Because if I say black people are my own worst enemy and I fight on behalf of black people, who do I fight against? Black people. So if you think black people are our own worst enemy, then by default, you have to attack black people, subvert black people, undermine black people, kill black people. So that is self-exposure. I'm exposing myself. And then you can build on that. Because if I articulate certain positions, then that means I'm going to have to, by default, articulate certain actions. So what New Negro Self-Exposure Protocol calls for is that when someone articulates positions or engages in actions that are subversive to black people, we show those actions. And we put the facts, the hardcore facts of, hey, these are this person's positions over our opinion, our feelings, our beliefs. It's like, listen, this is this organization or this individual's stated position. So they self-expose. They acknowledge this is who they are. When Farrakhan gets on the world media and says Malcolm was a traitor and we dealt with Malcolm like a nation is supposed to deal with a traitor, that carries more weight than whatever opinions, analysis, or attitudes I have about the minister. He self-exposed himself as an enemy to Malcolm and a lot of other things, but let's just go on that alone. And when you find a black person who self-exposes, then you can expose their words, share their insights, share the evidence that they unveiled about themselves, expose them using their own shit, not your opinion about their shit. Isolate them, meaning that don't allow them to infect the rest of us. And then you expel them, meaning that don't allow them to come into spaces, movements, or communities and contaminate or disrupt us. So expose, isolate, expel. That's the protocol. Oh, expose. Okay, here's what he said. Isolate. Well, I'm not going to go and join his movement. I'm not going to participate in what he's doing. And I can't really ally with those who are allied with this person. Isolate. Expel. They can't come into our movement. So I'm not going to your shit. You don't come to my shit. That's the protocol. And that keeps shit clean. And that cuts down on a lot of rumors and gossip. I don't think we can do what the Chinese do because Chinese, they have sovereignty, autonomy, independence. So we're in a position where we're trying to secure sovereignty, autonomy, and independence. So we have to be more radical than the Chinese. The Chinese are trying to preserve and expand their power base. We're trying to create our power base. So we can't duplicate, and we want to avoid many of the pitfalls of the Chinese Revolution. The ongoing the Chinese Revolution is still being enacted. And there's a lot of regression, a lot of retreat, a lot of betrayal of their own revolution. So we can't duplicate what the Chinese do, but I understand what you say about, I prefer to call it social capital and collectivism more so than social credit system. But, you know, they got a lot of that from us. If you look at a lot of, whether it's Mao or Ho Chi Minh, if you look at Asia, Southeast Asia, a lot of the Asian revolutionaries borrowed a lot. They made better use of African revolutionary ideology and philosophy than we have. And that's a whole nother presentation. I might have to do a Bro Diallo show on the presence or emergence of African revolutionary philosophy, ideology, and methodology across the world, where you find African thinkers being venerated everywhere but in Africa or the African diaspora. A lot of shit that we disregard and throw away, other people pick up. Now, we recognize when we do that, when that happens with our music. Like, what's the hub of jazz and swing and bop music? What's the number one source of jazz, swing, and bop music in the world? Japan. Japan. They've taken something we've pretty much discarded or had snatched away from us. You might interpret it different. So, Bakari, yeah, he's in Chicago. It's a red book. I don't know. I have that book. I might bring that book out. You're right, Malaine. Dr. Batu Shikari wrote a book on the danger of tribalism, mysticism, and primitivism and the rise of genocide. It's a really good book. I've read it a couple of times. And I got to find my copy and share that. You're right, Marlene. Why do people think China is an ally to Africa? There's a couple of reasons. And I'm sorry I'm jumping around on questions here, but there's a couple of reasons. Number one, China isn't in opposition to the West, so there are enemies' enemies. The West, Western Europe, the United States is threatened by China. So a lot of black people think, well, if they're against white folks, then they must be on our side. If they're fighting trade wars and they're trying to jockey for position to displace white people, then they must be. So we have that fallacy that our enemies' enemies is our friend. That's one reason why we think it. Number two, they're dumping a lot of cash in Africa. China is spending a lot of money and is engaged in a lot of development projects in Africa, i.e., they're economically colonizing. And because of China's method of colonization is through debt peonage, China comes in with very favorable loans and terms and brings a lot of technology and builds a lot of infrastructure in Africa, whereas the Europeans and the Arabs came with sabers and guns. So we are very familiar with military colonization. We're very familiar with even cultural imposition. China does not come to Africa and say, you have to worship our God. Hell, we don't have a God. Whereas the Arab came and said, you better be Muslim or we'll cut your tongue out. We'll still cut your tongue out, but at least you'll have a Muslim tongue cut out. So they came in with not just military imperialism, but cultural imperialism. Europeans came and said, not only must you give us your resources, not only must you allow us to take you into slavery, but you got to pray to Jesus and you got to read Descartes and you have to come to our institutions. So they culturally, so China comes and says strictly, I don't care what, you ain't got to learn Mandarin. You ain't got to follow Confucius. You ain't even got to bow down and become Chinese communists or Maoists. Do what you want to do. Do you, player? We just here for the money. We just here to make these deals. So the method of colonization that Europeans are that Chinese are imposing looks different. The outcomes are the same. They're extracting resources from Africa, undercompensating us, and having undue influence on Africa's politics and Africa's developmental trajectory. So the outcome is the same. But because China is using a different, more subversive, more subtle methodology, they come in and they actually pay for what they take, whereas the Europeans didn't pay for shit. China will come in and say, well, you African leader, here's $13 billion of US dollars. And really, it's not even dollars. It's like promissory notes. The US government gives China in debt, says, listen, we'll give you promissory notes. And then China takes those promissory notes and transfers them around the world. And this is a debt that will never be paid. So China is using debt to indebt Africa. They're not even giving them hard currency. It's really, but that's money markets. It's a game. It's a hustle. It's a Ponzi scheme on a global scale. So China comes in. It doesn't come with weapons. It comes bearing gifts. And they literally places in Africa where China says, we're going to lease the land from you. It's like, oh, lease, yes, that's not colonization. You're paying us for the land. Yeah, here's $2.3 billion. And we want to buy your harvest. Okay, but we want to buy your harvest over the next 85 years. We want to buy a 99-year lease. So if there's any type of climate disruption, China's going to arrive in Kenya and say, hey, we're here for our due, our contractual due. We paid you, give us your harvest. And they were like, but our own people are starving. And so in the next couple of decades, you're going to see Africa exporting food while Africans are starving, just like they did in India. You had people, emaciated people, loading food onto boats to be shipped to Europe while they die of starvation in their own country. There are many of the countries that experience food instability and famine were exporting food at the same time. So that's what China's setting up. So China comes in writing checks. But the moment Africa is not able to meet the terms of those agreements, that's when the Chinese military is going to come. So they got the check in their front, holding it in front of you, but behind their back, they got the gun, the machine gun, the Kalashnikov. So that's why. This is a new method, a modern method, a digital monetary colonization as opposed to military cultural colonization. And that's why we fall for that. And Black people, we don't study revolution. We don't study, I ain't going to study war no more. So whenever we interact with anyone that's not African, we need to interact it with from an attitude of opposition and warfare. When we interact with people outside our race, we come with the attitude of mutual development, cooperation, and friendship in 2019, which is suicidal. Okay. Let's see what else. And I hope I answer, because every time I respond to a position, I in my own mind I'm opening up more. Let's go to Facebook. How you gonna go live and ain't gave nobody a heads up? Oh, I'm sorry, ML. I'm sorry, ML. I wasn't planning on going live, but things kind of lined up. I was at this conference here in Ann Arbor, in this beautiful hotel room. Look at that. I wish I could steal that. I love that chess picture behind me. Nice. But anyway, and I wasn't planning, because remember I told you I was going to go live before I left Chicago, and you know I'm really bad at traveling, and as much traveling as I do, I'm really bad at preparing and packing and traveling. I suck at traveling, so things never line up the way I want them. But I'm here now, so just let's just focus on the blessings, ML. And yes, did you watch When They See Us? I didn't watch When They See Us. I was actually living in New York during the fallout of the Central Park Five and the wilding. I was graduating high school and I had enrolled in that, and then following, I was in New York during from that, and then you jump to the Rodney King riots and uprising. So I was actually in New York when that happened in Central Park Five, when they first started doing stop and frisk and stuff, where they were saying that black youth were predatory. That was Ty. Y'all all mad at that one prosecutor, but that's where that whole predatory and this is when Dr. Amos Wilson, Professor William Mackey, they were all talking about this because they wanted to start doing genetic screening of black youth, because they felt that they could find what you call the violence gene or the crime gene at the same time, that they could find in young black men particularly a DNA sequence that would help them to understand why we are so prone to breaking the law, and they could somehow engage in some level of gene therapy or extra screening or intervention to stop black youth from becoming criminal. And you also look at that same time of the Central Park jogger case, was the time where the bell curve was published. So they were saying black people are genetically, intellectually inferior and genetically prone to violence. And so that Central Park jogger case was more about the legal system. There was a whole pseudoscience framed around that. And at the same time, these same people were profiting from and invested in creating, that's when Jay-Z was emerging. It's hard not to kill niggas. It's like a job, you know, streets is watching, and all this gangster rap had also emerged. So the Central Park jogger came and gave birth to a whole movement of criminalization of a generation. But no, I didn't watch it. I lived it. I lived it. And let me say something, and I feel this every time, you know, a movie or a documentary or an incident happens and the whole community's like hashtagging and outraged and I can't believe it. The way y'all feel, that's my constant state. That's my constant state. And it ain't just Central Park, what's going on in the Congo, what's going on in Haiti. This is my constant state of outrage. You know, so I kind of can't really get with the, oh, there's this new documentary and everybody's outraged. Can you believe what they did? Yes, I can believe what they did. I'm outraged when there's no racism. I'm shocked. Can you believe there's no incident, there's no atrocity, there's no racist incident? You know, that's my constant state. The state that y'all come in, I don't really get the highs and lows, the outrage and calmness. I stay perpetual state of outrage. So no, I didn't see When They See Us. I'll watch it, you know, but I like to see stuff like that when the hype has died down, because I know when the hype is up and everybody's paying attention, it's more likely than not I'm going to come up and say something I shouldn't have said, or draw some conclusion that I shouldn't draw. So give me another couple of months and I'll sit down and watch When They See Us. But I was there. I was there. I've been stopped at least, man, shit, almost a dozen times by the New York City Police Department. I was born and raised in Missouri. And I never had a cop. I interacted with the Missouri, the Kansas City Police Department, the Kansas State Trooper, the Missouri Highway Patrol. I interacted with those pigs my entire freaking childhood. And the first time a uniformed police officer called me a nigger was in New York City. I was crossing Eastern Parkway by the museum and the Botanic Gardens. And I was coming out of the #2 train, and I came up on the wrong side to get to the Brooklyn Museum, and I was crossing. And if y'all know Eastern Parkway, it's like several lanes, and then there's a little island. And I was standing on that island, and the cop didn't just call me a nigger. The cop got on the speaker and said, "Get out the street, nigger." And all the people, you know Eastern Park, if you know the Parkway, let's go. But anyway, the people going up and down the street, and you know that right up the street is Crown Heights, a lot of Hasidic Jews and a lot of black folks, a lot of West Indians. Not one person flinched. Not one person was like, oh, you know, it's like 1992. And he got on the loudspeaker, like, "Get off the street, nigger," and just kept going up the street. And I'm like, word? And the cop kept going, and I look around, and everybody's just going about their wonderful urban life. Brooklyn, New York City, where they paint murals of Biggie. New York been racist AF. New York been racist AF. And all those beautiful some of the most beautiful black folks, and this merger of African, Caribbean, Black American culture that gave us hip hop started out. I mean, just and just dance hall, and there's all these festivals, and Jazzmobile, and the African Street Festival, and the Boys and Girls High School, and you know, Fulton Mall, and all that shit, and all this black beauty, all this black rhetoric, and scholars, the home of Dr. Ben, the home of Dr. John Henry Clark, Harlem, 125th Street, Malcolm X and Lenox Avenue, all that shit, and black folks there steeped in oppression and ain't got one lick of power. Even had a black mayor David Deakins. I was there for all that shit. And I couldn't get black people to unite around anything revolutionary and one thing I understood, whether organizing in a place like Kansas City and working with the National Black United Front in a place like Missouri versus New York, is that in New York, they had a lot of illusions. We look beautiful, we look powerful, we look like we got black judges, and any day you could walk down the street and pass half a dozen black millionaires. You could walk down the street and Spike Lee coming in one direction, a black Major Owens, black congressman coming, and they all right there, shoulder to shoulder. I got a homie, he moved to New York, and within 2 weeks of living in New York, he was at this cocktail party with Jay-Z and Puff Daddy, and he was like, and he had on his bow tie, I was like, I have arrived. So there's a lot of illusions of black power and black elevation. But when you look at the underbelly of New York, you know, one thing is fortunate about the Central Park Five, the reason they're not in jail right now is because there was media attention brought to it. But for every Central Park Five young black men that are eventually exonerated, there are 1,000 who never get exonerated. You know. So the struggle continues. I was there during the Rockefeller drug laws, and remember the rapper or the rap mogul, the rap mogul Russell Simmons. He was going to save us from the Rockefeller drug laws, and remember Jay-Z was going to help him save us from the Rockefeller drug laws 20 years ago. And they come in and they gas us up with these movements, and they print T-shirts and do conferences, and then all of a sudden we move on. And this is what I call this. I call this atrocity hopping. You hop from atrocity to atrocity hopping. We get all inflamed about an atrocity. We make a lot of noise, and then we calm the fuck down until the next atrocity. And sometimes it could be a brand new atrocity, or we get more information about an old atrocity. But the institutional struggles that allow for the atrocities are never touched. They never change. So I'm only going to join y'all in every fourth atrocities. Right? So every fourth atrocity. I can't do every atrocity because I got other shit I want to do. I'd rather go just lounge in decent hotel rooms in Ann Arbor. But you holler at me every fourth atrocities. Allow me to skip 3. So what atrocity is this? I'll count this as the third atrocity. So the next atrocity, either historical atrocity that we remember or new atrocity that they commit, I'll get up in arms. I'll hashtag the fuck out of that. and then I'll skip the next three because I'm sick of this atrocity hobby. And let me tell you something, why it's not, I can't get excited because it doesn't really change the work that I do. If they talk about the Central Park joggers or the Central Park 5, and then, the Jenna 6, the Scottsboro boys, I mean, you throw a rock at a calendar. You can take a calendar 100 years into a past or 100 years into the future, and you throw a dart at it, you're going to hit on a time where there's atrocities going on. But it doesn't really change because I'm already working to subvert the systems and institutions of capitalism and global white domination. So what do I do different? Before I remember whether they come into my direct consciousness or not, whether they do something tomorrow, whether they let 1 million black men out of death row or they lock 1 million more black men up in death row. I don't think that they're fit to rule and they are worthy to have that power over us, to do us right or harm. I don't think they should have the power to help or harm us. They should have no power over us. Whether they intend to use it for good or bad, they should have no power over us. And that's what I organized to subvert. And whatever happens while they're in power doesn't fucking matter to me. If every single oppressor woke up and had an epiphany and they all became Bill Gates and decided to give their fortune to vaccinate us and to help us, I don't give a fuck. You should not have that power. You should not have that money. If they gave us reparation, the struggle continues. If they freed every black political prisoner, the struggle continues. If they intensify, I adjust the method, but I never change the mission. And I don't even know if I answered your question. But no, I haven't seen it when they see us. And I don't intend to watch it until the hype dies all the way down. There's a good book, a pretty respectable book called Mao, A Life. It's a biography, really good book on Mao. So, no, I haven't seen When They See Us. But I'm very familiar with this Central Park jogger and the Central Park 5. Thank you for posting the support links. I don't deserve you, ML. But I'm going to work to be worthy of your support. Thank you. Oh, you live here in Ann Arbor? They told me there was 2.5 black people here. I ain't seen them. Marva says, I have a problem with those who are refusing to watch When They See Us because their emotions are too fragile. Yeah, I have a problem with that too. Nigga, how long you been black? How the blood clot long have you been black? I have a problem with black people who shy away from exposure to atrocities. Because they're not mad that there was an atrocity. When somebody says, I refuse to watch that movie, I refuse to share that link of that child being shot, I refuse to acknowledge, they're not saying I'm against atrocities. They're saying I'm against being exposed to atrocities. They're saying I'm against having to acknowledge the atrocities. What they're saying is, I want to be in bliss. Remember, ignorance is bliss. Therefore, bliss is ignorance. So what they're saying is, please do not disrupt my bliss, which means please do not inform my ignorance. So I don't really have sympathy. And when you talk about trigger warnings, right? And I hate to quote Scheherazade Ali because by and large, she's a clown. But when she's right, she's right. So this is, I'm going to take the hashtag broken clock here. Scheherazade Ali said that when a child is born to the Inuit in the frozen north, the Eskimos, they don't really like that term Eskimo, but the Inuit tribes, when the child is born, they take the child out from the mother's arms and they take the child out into the frigid weather and they throw it in the ice cold water. It's like, if you can't deal with the reality of an Eskimo life, you might as well just not even try to live it. Don't even come into the community. It's not even worth using the resources to raise you up, to keep you alive and safe, if you cannot endure the fundamental reality of an Eskimo or Inuit. Sorry. And the fundamental reality of an Inuit is frozen, cold weather, which no longer is because, global warming and climate change and ecosystem disruption, but in the past. So they would put every newborn child through this basic stress test. Say, can you endure the cold? Because if you can't endure the cold, we might as well not even bother trying to raise you. So the fundamental reality of being born black on planet Earth is oppression and racism and atrocities born of living under the domination of a psychopathic race of people. And if you cannot endure, like, If you've been so sheltered, if you've been so isolated, if you've been so encapsulated, then you're really not even worth our energy and input. And you say it's harsh. If you can't deal with the reality, if you have not developed navigational tools and coping mechanisms for what it, and I'm not saying don't take a retreat. Lord knows where I'd be if not for Reese's peanut butter cups and Xboxes. I like my Xbox. I like my peanut butter cups. I like playing my basketball. I like calling Dita on the phone and cracking on people and making fun of people's hairstyles and funny ways of dressing. I have my outlets. I have my release valves. I have my extracurricular activities. So you come to Bro Diallo's house. Yes, there's a bunch of books and papers and rantings and writings and revolutionary red, black, and green posters. There's all that shit. But there's also coloring books, adult coloring books. You know, my aunt got me into adult coloring books. There are comic books. You know, my wife and I, we make time to stroll, and we live on the south side of Chicago, and we stroll through Washington Park to look at the turtles and the cranes. So there's a difference between sheltering yourself from reality and doing what's necessary to help you navigate that reality. We don't shelter ourselves from the horrendous reality of what it is to be Black under global white domination. But we do allow ourselves some respite. We do allow ourselves some outlets. We're here at a psychological conference, and my wife's going right now in the room doing some academic work, writing up her notes and transferring her notes and trying to do damage reports, because I know she stayed behind at the conference when I came home, and I know she said some things she shouldn't have said to them good, educated white folks. So she's doing her work. But later tonight, we might take a walk and see some of the sites. There's a museum here, and there's a vegan bakery up the block. So we're going to go up the block and eat some vegan baked goods, and we might go to the museum. I might go by myself because I can't really enjoy a museum with her because she always wants to look at the foo-foo frivolous stuff. But all I'm saying is be a total, complete person. So I have no sympathy for people who try to encapsulate themselves from the Black reality. I have no issues with Black people who endure. So somebody says, hey, I got to burn some sage. I got to go play with my children. I got to go feed my guppies and water my plants. And then I'm going to sit down and consume this horrendous material and use this reality to anchor me in place, to motivate me, to enrage me. And so I can use that rage, that energy, that adrenaline to fight this system. And then after I watch it, I might go back and look at my house plants. I love staring at my house plants. I feel kind of weird. I wait till there's nobody's home because I could stare at a house plant for hours. I don't know what that is. So navigational tools, rest, relaxation, in order to reinvigorate yourself for the struggle, thumbs up. Oh, I don't want to see no Black people suffer, thumbs down. Fuck you. Because you're just trying to fucking be ignorant. Because many of us profit from that. And yeah, and then also the people that are just out that transient outrage, the atrocity hoppers. They just really, they use Black suffering the same way people do fashion trends. Like if I come up, you know, if y'all come up, you know, remember Darfur? Everybody, oh, Darfur, ethnic cleansing. Remember the Gen-6? Oh, the Gen-6. Oh. Remember, what's that, Tulia, Texas? Remember the Tulia, Texas, where the sheriffs went into this small Texas Black community and arrested 75% of the Black community for being drug dealers off the word of one white informant? Remember the Tulia, Texas? And y'all use Black suffering like a fucking fashion trend. So if I come up and say, hey, yeah, LaQuinn McDonald. Somebody look at me like, LaQuinn McDonald, what? That's old shit. That shit is stale. We not on LaQuinn McDonald. We up on this Central Park 5. That's that's retro. We on this retro atrocity. I come and say, oh my God, look what they're doing in South Sudan. We ain't tripping off of South Sudan anymore. We're in Burundi, dog. We outraged about Burundi. We outraged about the March of Return in Palestine. BDS, baby. Y'all use these fucking atrocities like fashion trends. Y'all don't really do anything to fucking challenge the system that enacts it, but y'all just up on the latest atrocities. And y'all wear that shit like a badge. It's inappropriate. I want to fight water. Oh yeah, Flint, Michigan water. Oh, we ain't on Michigan water anymore, dog. We on prison reform. Meek Mill. Prison reform. Like the fuck? It's a tragedy, but I guess we staying under oppression for too long. But I'm gonna have to wrap this up. It's almost 1. I gotta go get my sons out of the pool, and we're gonna go for lunch. It's almost, what time is it? Oh shit! If it's 1 o'clock on my way, that means it's 2 o'clock here in Ann Arbor. So, and I haven't had anything to eat. I had a cup of coffee. Erica, what we gonna do about food? I'm almost off the thing. I got to get off the thing, or my wife won't talk to me while I'm on live. See, she won't talk to me till I get off the thing. This is the thing. Are you off the thing? Let me get off the thing. Thank you for another Q&A session. I don't know how long the Bro Diallo YouTube. I'll post y'all the message on Instagram or something where they saying, you know, my YouTube page has been flagged or identified as a source of hate speech. So I don't know what. But hey, the struggle continues. If I just got to go out here on King Drive and 47th Street and spew the message, then so be it. Come to King Drive and 47th Street, and I'll stand on that corner and spew the message like an old street preacher if they kick me off. Because, you know, they want this social media basically to be a commercial space. They want social media to be a mall. If you ain't selling frivolous shit and generating profit, you know. But anyway. I appreciate y'all. I apologize that I'm so late doing this. I'll be live, Bro Diallo show Monday morning, and the struggle continues. So Johnny, I got some stuff to write up. But Sunday, we won't be having a Sunday because I'll be traveling and packing and traveling and setting up Sunday. So we won't be having an African World Coalition meeting this Sunday. But every Sunday following, we'll continue to work with the African World Coalition. But I'll also be posting some stuff. If you're working with the African World Coalition, please join us on Slack. We're just trying to find other to dilute our shit because we put all our shit in one place. They can just cut us off. We all YouTube, all Facebook, they can cut us off. So we're going to try to spread our shit around a little bit more. So download Slack, and that way I can see the documents and the write-ups for the initiatives for African World Coalition. I guess that's all the announcements. What will it take for black folks to get off black capitalism? Shit, we ain't on black capitalism. We're not on black. There is no black capitalist, according to how white folks define capitalism. We got a lot of rich niggas. We got black people with a lot of fiat. But if you don't control the printing press, who prints the money? Who prints the money? The Federal Reserve. Who controls the Federal Reserve? Does Jay-Z have any controlling stock in the Federal Reserve? Can you name a natural resource? Does Jay-Z own any? Does he have the military might to control, to open up or close down any shipping lanes? Venezuela has the largest reserve of oil in the fucking world, of crude oil, sweet crude. And they drove that country into abject poverty by controlling what comes in and out of that. So you can have a lot of fucking money. You can even have a lot of resources. But if you don't control the means of production and the means of transportation and the means of trade, it don't matter how much money you have. So they are not black. The only difference between me and Jay-Z right now, it's a big fucking difference, but it's the only difference, is his consumption capacity. Jay-Z has the ability to buy more shit than I can buy. He has no more power to control shit than I do. And I know that sounds crazy. What you talking about? Because if Jay-Z and Beyonce got on their social media thing right now and said, buy this sneaker or buy this cracker or go vegan, meatless Mondays, then y'all do it. So they have influence, but they don't need the influence you gave her. If you ever see the last episode of Game of Thrones, when Queen Cersei was standing there with all the power, and just like that, the same people who were willing to fight or die for her were willing to kill her, and she had no power at all. And she went from controlling a nation to scurrying around an empty basement like a rat. That's kind of black power. That's what these influencers are. But more on that. I told my wife I'm getting off of this thing, so I'm going to get off this thing. That's a good question, but I have to come back to it. Very good question. So I answered the show. Synthesize African consciousness. So let me make a note of that. I'll see y'all later. Thanks for joining in. I hope this is good compensation, even though I'm late doing the Q&A. I just knew I had to do it, and when I found some time. So since I decided to leave that conferences, not go back, I'm using my conference time to do this. So I make sacrifices. I struggle hard. And get well soon, Chuck. I'm glad Chuck is doing better. Get well. Send your get well soon wishes to Chuck. Please support MLs. You can find the link on my page, her GoFundMe, and that's that. Peace. All right, some outro music. That's outro music.